Nsemmikom jina Karl Schembri nilqakom għal-edizzjoni oħra ta' Antenni Suspettużi, il-podcast ta' PEN Malta mal-awturi ta' żmienna. Illum se niltaqgħu ma' poeta, artista u ġurnalista żagħżugħa li tikteb bl-Ingliż u anke tħossha aktar komda titkellem bl-Ingliż u għalhekk din il-poddata se nagħmluha bl-Ingliż. Sam Alekksandra, a very warm welcome to Antenni Suspettużi. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Karl.
As we record, I am now in Nairobi, where I live and work. Where are you now, Sam? Where are you recording this from?
I am recording this from the town that I grew up in, Slima, which is where I live currently.
That's where you live, and I guess where you write most of your things as well. What is your ritual? How do you write? It's a question we ask of every guest who comes on this podcast.
So I always start my day with writing. I do an exercise of stream of consciousness just to get out whatever's on my mind for 3 or 4 pages. And I write at any point possible. So whether it's on my phone, on my notes app, or on my journal, I take any moment I can, whether it's commuting or in between meetings or traveling to write. So at any time possible, basically.
And is your process then to go back to what is written in the stream of consciousness and try to make sense of it, or do you have somewhere in mind where you want to reach with it?
I don't have one approach to my writing. Sometimes during that stream of consciousness, a poem just emerges naturally, or I go back and I see what recurring theme is coming up in my writing, and I try to my streams of consciousness really tell me where I need to go with my writing at any certain point. For me, my muse, let's say, is my own experience. I use that as a lens to inform all of my writing. So yeah, it depends. That either I'm going back into what I write and kind of forming it in a way, or just that exercise makes it easier for me to just kind of then go straight into writing poetry.
And do you have a reader in mind when you write?
No, I don't. And that's the same for my art practice. I don't think too much about the audience. I'm trying to be as authentic as possible to myself and to the experience and what the work is trying to how the work is trying to come into materiality, whether it's in poetry or through objects or through performance. And then hopefully by being very authentic and vulnerable to the work, then the audience can connect to that in some kind of way.
What do you mean by authentic?
That's a good question. What strikes me as more authentic? I think it's just a feeling, you know. For me, it's like when I know that a poem is ready, or an artwork is ready. There's just a feeling of I mean, I'm not a mother, but I imagine this is a feeling of kind of giving birth to something. Like when it's ready, you know it's ready, and the work, if you're very connected to it, tells you that it's ready, and then it's out into the world and no longer yours to nurture or bring up. So authenticity is really just listening to myself and the relationship I have to the work, and not trying to think, for example, like, oh, I want this kind of person to read my work, or I want cool people to read my work, you know, that it has nothing to do with it. It's just about being true to the work.
And does it also mean not being inhibited by external factors, by what's expected or not expected of you, or what might provide a backlash to what you write?
Yes, definitely. All external factors, you know. I'm a very sociable person. I really feed off people's energies, and I'm very lucky to have a really cool circle of friends around the world. But then when it comes to the work, I really need to be alone not necessarily alone in a literal sense, but kind of it's me and the work and God in the room. God for me being the spirit that kind of takes hold. So yes, not trying to think even about what it's going to look like at the end, really going through the whole process of getting there, and stripping yourself of any inhibition as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. You've already alluded to the fact that you work on other art forms, but I get the impression that poetry is your starting point and you are essentially a poet first and foremost. Is that correct? Is poetry the thing that informs your art?
Yes, definitely. When I describe my work, I always say that it's the delivery of words through different media, whether it's through poetry, so actual text, or through objects, or through performance. But poetry is always the basis of what I do. So for me, this act of kind of trying to distill an experience, and by that I mean getting it into the most ethereal nature possible is very important for me in anything I do. For example, I just made a film. I made it my debut film, and the script is based off of poetry. My work in metal and wood and thread is to do with climate change, and my work on ecological poetry. My performance work that I just did, for example, in the Malta Biennale, is also based on conversations I had with residents around St. Elmo, and then distilling that into words and then feeding that into the performance. I hope that makes sense.
Where does that come from? Your preference for words, has it always been like that while developing your skills and artistry in other forms?
I mean, it all goes back to when I became a journalist, actually, and that goes back to 2020, the beginning of 2020, actually, just before COVID took over the world, and I was going through a breakup, your first love, and you think the whole world is ending and nobody understands. And I was dealing that while going through this global pandemic and spending a lot of time in my bedroom. So I was in intense distress. So I just started writing naturally, just to everything kind of felt really like a haze that every day was kind of melting into each other. And so I needed writing at that point to just differentiate the days. So for me, it was really like a survival tactic. I didn't intend to be a journalist or a poet or anything. So I would start every day just by, okay, so today there's a cloud that looks like a horse, and the next day I ate strawberries, and the next day, and just to have something that feels like I'm alive and that I'm not going crazy. So then that just became a part of me, from survival to really a way to understand myself and understand the world. And then I became a journalist with Love in Malta, maybe 2 months after that. And I just kind of fell into it, and then I always felt that words are very, 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 very important to me, because ironically enough, even though I'm a journalist and a poet and I work a lot with words, I'm very bad at communicating my feelings in real life. So for me, if I don't have this writing, then I don't have anything.
So COVID gave you the gift of poetry or writing, really. And
Yes.
but that's really interesting what you said, because in my case, it felt almost the opposite. I almost stopped writing the moment I felt that every day was the same as the previous one. And for you, writing was a way of distinguishing one day from the other. I was describing my days to myself in this exercise until I said, I'm going to stop this because every day is looking the same, and it felt too boring. So that's really interesting to see the different impact that COVID had on all of us.
I think the intense, just to add on that, the intense emotional distress of the first, that breakup that I went through, like of my, you think it's your first love, really intensified it as well for me. So even though it was very monotonous, the days were quite mundane, they were all the same, I was feeling so intensely that these feelings just had to come out, and I couldn't go and dance with my friends. And this was my way of just releasing.
You mentioned you became a journalist with Love in Malta, and that's where you were signing your stories as Sam Vassallo, which you
Yes.
now still do as a freelance journalist since you've left Love in Malta. So you're as an artist, you present yourself as Sam Alekksandra, and your journalistic career, you are Sam Vassallo. What's behind these two names? Is this your way of keeping those two worlds separate? Do they ever meet? Poetry, journalism, art versus career. What is that? What is that all about?
So the name Sam Alekksandra, I remember the first time I signed a work, Sam Alekksandra, and I made this ceramic sculpture, and my teacher said, okay, now you take this little pin-like thing and you sign your name into the wet clay. And my second name is Alekksandra, and I just decided in that moment to write S. Alekksandra. And there's something about giving myself a name that gave me agency over the fact that I can be an artist and I can explore whatever I want in that capacity without being inhibited by things that are already given to me and that I cannot control, like my family name, like where I'm from, like what people perceive of me. So giving myself that name was really just kind of like opening a world to myself, really. So that's why I use that for my artistic things. And I mean, do the worlds meet? I mean, I believe that they do. I think I like to push the boundaries even in my journalistic work as much as possible without using too much creative license that things get confusing, because obviously there's an objective with journalism, and people need to understand, and there's an audience for it, and I don't get to just kind of write for myself. But it's also my legal name, so it also makes sense to use it in when I'm writing something for print or for an online portal.
Does journalism in a way reflect in your art, or does it inform any of your artistic product?
Well, of course. I mean, I do tackle contemporary issues that are affecting the world in my art, and I get to do research about these issues through my practice in journalism. So they do feed each other in that way. Even though mostly I'm writing about love, what it means to have a body, and these things, especially in my practice of performance and objects, I talk a lot about the ecological crisis we're going through, the effects on that psychologically. I talk about occupation, capitalism. So there's, I do think that they feed each other. I don't think I can't separate myself into different boxes in that way. Even though I have these two names, right? That everything is always feeding each other in a morphing and ever evolving way, I think.
What kind of stories in journalism do you like working most on?
So, of course, when I was a full-time journalist with Love in Malta, I really enjoyed doing political stories, especially when they had to do with the case of Daphne Caruana Galizia. She's also a very big reason why I became a journalist ultimately. Her death affected me and a lot of people profusely, so that also played a big part in it. Now I'm thinking about Daphne, and I completely forgot what you asked.
Well, I asked you what kind of stories you liked working most on, but you were
Yes.
somehow answering it by saying that Daphne was a big motivation for you to start journalism. Is that it? Was that a motivating factor for you?
I mean, ultimately, for me, it's all about writing about power structures and investigating any kind of power structure, whether it's the forces of impunity that led to Daphne Caruana Galizia's death, and a myriad of other topics. For example, I worked a lot on sexual health and the issue of domestic violence in Malta. With sexual health, I published the fact that Malta's national sexual health policy has not been updated in 10 years, and really kind of pushed a written campaign about why this is abhorrent and why this needs to change. Also fueled by the fact that during COVID, a lot of women in Malta were not getting access to contraception, myself included. Because I found out through an investigation that contraception in Malta is not on the essential medicine list of the government, which means that the government is not obliged to stock up on these medicines in case of a crisis like COVID-19, like the war in Ukraine. So, I think in general term, power structures and dissecting what this means for the average person and how this affects their lives and what we must do as civil society to fight it.
Do you feel that Daphne's assassination has limited or actually has emboldened more journalists to push further for the freedom of expression?
I mean, obviously, it sent shockwaves through the whole nation, and especially journalists. That one of us was brutally murdered, and the shockwaves are still being felt today. I think that it has emboldened journalists to express themselves and keep fighting. The problem is that it's a long run game. It's a long-term game. So it's the stamina that has to be kept, especially by journalists, unraveling this incredible web of corruption and impunity is extremely tough. In terms of censorship, I think we've always had an issue with censorship in Malta, even now, after her death, maybe even more so. And the fight continues every single day.
One of the issues you mentioned you've worked on as a journalist, but you touch on and you write about in your poetry is you mentioned sexual health as a theme, but the other side of that coin is personal choice, the women's liberation, the liberation of the body. How primitive do you see Maltese society in dealing with this from its total taboo of discussing abortion to, as you've mentioned, even policies not updated in over a decade. That used to be a story when I was still a journalist over some 15, 20 years ago, when sexual policies were also outdated, not updated. Uh, do you think we're still very primitive on that, and maybe still super Catholic, despite the masses abandoning much of the Catholic formalities of mass and religion?
I think even though we're not practicing the religion as much as we were, and the presence in actual churches has been in decline, I think that what we inherited from the church, which by that I mean a culture of shame, is still very present in Maltese society. Whether it comes to and you can see this in sexual health, in the fact that we are not equipping people with the right knowledge to make sound choices, with the fact that we don't trust women to have agency over their bodies when it comes to abortion or not, women not feeling empowered or not knowing the right paths to go if they are facing abuse at home, out of shame of what others might think. Even in the language that we use, whether you're using Maltese or English, there's at least I feel a certain level of it's very political, and there's also a certain level of shame that is attached to it. So I think we're still navigating our identity and being in society through this insidious lens of shame, which feeds into a lot of all of these issues that I mentioned. So I don't know if it's about the primitiveness, but as you said, we're still talking about the same issues for the last, especially in sexual health, for the last 15 years, and yet there's not much that has changed. I mean, technically we don't have a full ban on abortion anymore, but they've just made it so complicated to do that it's virtually impossible. But yes, it's a really an uphill struggle.
You've just touched upon the language question. First of all, can you tell us a bit about your language preferences? You write and speak in English. What is your relationship with language?
Yes. Yes, in fact, we talked about this when you asked me to do the interview. So, my first thought when I looked at, I had watched a few of the episodes, and I realized that they were all in Maltese, and my first thought was like, shit, for lack of a better word, because I'd love to be able to, I can do this whole interview in Maltese, but the fear of making a mistake that would be recorded, or the fact that a lot of my peers have not heard me speak my own language is just, I don't know, something that is very complex, and I kind of digest it in a maybe not healthy way. But basically, I am from Slima. I've grown up in a family where my grandparents were taught that their own language was not something to be proud of. In fact, something that should be shamed. They were not allowed to speak their own language at school, and were in fact shamed if you. My grandmother telling me the story of the children being made to look out for if they heard people speaking Maltese, and then you go to the teacher, Miss, they're speaking Maltese, and they would be literally shamed in class. So I come from a family where that shame was inherited from adolescence, of course, and which is a classic colonizer tactic, right? You make the enemy within the self. So my grandparents spoke to their parents in Italian and English. And then that was just kind of generationally kind of passed on. You know, my grandparents kept Maltese for themselves and to speak between them, and then not to their children. My parents learned Maltese at school, and they spoke to me in English. So I learned my own language at school with much difficulty, because I was also taught that, like, okay, why do I need to learn this language when I know the language of the world, and also my accent makes my speaking stand out very much, which was a really big issue for me when I was 7 to 16 and having to communicate in class, because I remember even the teachers kind of, not belittling me, perhaps some would, but also just kind of thinking of it as something very cute. So for me, it was just such a difficult facet of my own identity, and I still think about it and kind of struggle with it today, especially moving back to Malta, where you kind of confronted with your roots and your identity every day, and you take, let's say, the news or what's happening in your country a bit more to heart. It's a part of my identity that I still have to navigate and come to terms with every day.
Do you see Maltese language as being in danger of extinction?
Yes, definitely. I think even the fact that we're not willing to learn the actual terms for things, and just kind of anglifying words just to make it easier. For me, maybe that's some could argue that that's how a language develops, but I think that we are always taking the opportunity to speak English just because it's one of our national languages, and then everybody can understand. But I've lived in France, I've lived in Germany, and okay, they only have one language, but people are expected to make an effort to learn a language in order to integrate. And somehow here it's always left on the back burner. Like, why should someone who is not born here learn the language? Well, why not? Language is incredibly powerful. Language opens perhaps a different part of your personality. Language is the key to a lot of things. And starting from myself, I'm starting to write in my own language, Maltese, and starting to make the effort to read a bit more, and I'm really enjoying that. But I am afraid of the future of the language, especially coming back to that idea of shame, of when, for example, somebody writes something in Maltese, people are so quick to correct the grammar of some of what they're saying, instead of just appreciating the fact that, like, let's speak and not have to police each other over language, which we don't do in different languages, unless we're asking for it, I guess, if you want to be corrected.
But that's an interesting development. You've started writing in Maltese, you just said. That's
Yes.
completely new, right?
It is completely new, and I'm trying, and for me, it's about trying to be a bit playful with my whole shtick with my own language. So I'm not trying to approach it in a way that I want it to be perfect, but I want it to be the same playful way that I approach my writing in English. So I'm trying to take it as it comes, and then see where it's going to develop there. So it's been a very interesting experience for me. Yeah, I'm really enjoying it, and I hope to publish something soon.
Okay, looking forward to that. But I think from what you said, if I may hazard a bit of an observation, you seem to be one of those creatures in danger of extinction, of what we used to call talpepe. but right with that background. So, but that
Yes.
is now on. It is a dying breed, if you like, and there is a bigger breed, I think, of not newcomers, young people who are still not speaking Maltese, but for other reasons. Latest surveys of the use of the Maltese language show that English is becoming the first language for more and more people, not of the same socio-economic background as you mentioned, the SLIMA type. I share your concern about where this is going. It's a bit of an unknown, but at the same time quite a predictable scenario where there's not enough, I think, policy investment in the language and what makes us really Maltese, and that's I think of huge concern.
I agree.
Sam, you've been organizing a monthly poetry event called Poetry from the Future in Strada Stretta and Valletta. Can you tell us a bit about that? What is that about, and what's the feedback that you're getting about it?
Yes, of course. So this has now become my favorite day of the month. Since October now, it's already been half a year of them. And essentially, a friend of mine, a dear friend, who has a bar at the beginning of Straight Street, had the opportunity to rent an old wine cellar, basically a very tiny bar, and declared to me and our peers that he wanted to make a poetry bar. And I said, "What's a poetry bar?" He's like, "It's a bar for poetry." Okay, fair enough. And a year into this new bar named Rumi, I asked, where's the poetry, and decided to take it in my own hands, I guess, and went to buy a PA system and a mic and a stand, and decided, okay, let's make a poetry night once a month, like I used to frequent in Berlin. And what am I going to call it? Well, I read a really cool book called Poetry from the Future, and then that title really stuck with me, and I've always wanted to use it. And a few years back, I wanted to make my first LP, which is still sitting somewhere in my computer, and I wanted to name it Poetry from the Future. And I'm like, okay, I think this is actually the time to use this. So I called it Poetry from the Future. And essentially, it's just an open mic for contemporary poetry of any language. Mostly we've had Maltese and English. And each month has a theme, which you can adhere to. You can write something new according to the theme. You can completely rebel against it. You can look into your already written work in your archive and pull something out of there. Or you can choose something from a poet that you like and you admire, and step up and read. And it has been so beautiful. It has been an incredible experience. We've had seasoned poets to people who have never spoken in public before, like writing poetry and stepping up to the mic, and it's a really beautiful little society of poets, and it's been really well. We've had at least between like 10 and 20 poets each time coming up, taking the mic, feeling inspired during the moment, and reaching into their phone and finding something to read. And the idea is just to give a platform for contemporary poetry and spoken word, because I really believe that poetry is meant to be read out loud.
So you're getting the participants. How is it being received by those listening, those in this bar?
I mean, we have people who come every single month, so I think that tells me a lot about how it's being received. I think that the feedback has been really incredible. For both the poets who are reading and both those who are just coming to listen to poetry, have a glass of wine at the beginning of the week and listen to some really beautiful words by very different people. And it's also been really encouraging for me, because I kind of push myself to write something that's complete, to be read out every single month, because you know how it is. You have like 1,001 drafts of 1 million poems, and they just kind of sit there until an extended deadline, or you decide to be disciplined. But mostly for me, it's the extended deadline. So for me, at least, I know that towards the beginning of every month, because we do it the first week of every month, I know that I have to deliver, and the people expect me to.
What's the next theme going to be?
So the next Poetry from the Future is next week on Wednesday, 3rd April. And the next theme is metamorphosis, because it's spring. So it's this idea of renewal and rebirth and life coming out of the death of winter, and the themes are always very broad like that. You know, metamorphosis can allude to many things. So yes, that's the thing.
Let's jump to your first book of poetry, which it was published by Ede Books, and from here a shout out and tribute to Zvezdan Relic, who passed away earlier this year. Zvezdan, the man behind Ede Books, an artist, photographer, designer, publisher, great friend to many of us on this podcast. First of all, how do you remember Zvezdan?
Zvezdan was an incredibly important person to me. He, I really believe, was one of the first people who really saw me, especially as a young and very confused artist at the tender age of 18. And I met Zvezdan. I mean, everybody has a story about how they met Zvezdan. I met Zvezdan when I got the camera and there was something faulty, and I sent an email to Panorama Flats and got a reply to come with my camera and see what can be done, and met Zvezda, and that was the beginning of a very fruitful friendship, very deep friendship and mentorship, and he exists within everything I do still today.
And he was the publisher of your first book, so the
And he
Politics
was the
of
publisher of my
Touch.
first book. Yes.
So
yes,
yeah,
and that's
how did that
incredible,
come
yeah.
about? How did that collection of poetry come about to be published by Ede Books?
So, Politics of Touch is a collection of works that were written in 2022, mostly when I was living in Berlin, and essentially Zvezdan and Antoine Cassar, who's the editor of the book, approached me to see if I had some works that I wanted to be published, and I said absolutely. So I had to look at all of these poems that I had written, and in Berlin I had formed part of a kind of poetry society through the Berlin Writers Workshop, which it's an incredible school. So I highly recommend anyone who is looking for a course, even online or if you're in Berlin. And it just started as a kind of conversation with Antoine and Svez, and then it came to be as one of I think it was the first round of chapbooks that Ede published in December 2022, December 2022, and that was one of the first times that I read my poetry out loud as well, so that was really interesting.
And what would you say is the overall theme that gathers all these writings into one little book?
Very much about love, what it means to be in love, how it feels to be in love, what it means to experience an absence of love, whether it's from personal experience or witnessing a scene unfolding where love is apparently not there, which is something that I explore in the first poem of the book, Breakup Cafe, which is the longest poem. And also about what it means to have a body, what it means to love yourself or not love yourself. I think that's the primary driver of politics of touch.
So yeah, the body, relationships, but also the mundane. You write about morning, sunrise. Maybe a question about the form. There's a lot, especially at the beginning, quite a bit of prose poetry. And then there are poems which reflect somehow the theme. The form reflects the theme. So both form and theme seem to be important for you. How does that work? Do you think of images? Do you think of an issue? Do you think of an idea, or do you go for the form first?
I don't have a great answer for you. I don't. It's very much an unconscious thing. I don't really think ever about form, and I don't ever think before I write that I want to write about this. It's very much a happening that happens when I'm writing. It's very much an in the moment thing, and I let God in the room kind of take over. That's what it is for me. I don't really control how I or what I write about. The first prose poetry in the book was literally, I had a poetry assignment with Berlin Writers Workshops, which is describe a scene unfolding. And I had no idea what to write, and I was very frustrated at home. I walked to a cafe, I got a coffee, and I was just worried that I wouldn't have anything to read or to show. And then suddenly it was there in front of me. And you know, when you see a couple who are in such loving agony, and I felt like this thief finally like stealing this very juicy scene in front of me, and then that's how Breakup Cafe came. The poems about the morning are the days that actually look a lot like what it's looking today, which is a very moody sky and very opposite, well, feeding a lot into my mood, because the weather always affects my mood in the morning. And then just writing about that. Poems about love are kind of like tattoos about what I was going through in the moments that I write them, or coming out of my subconscious because they're lying there somewhere. There's only one poem, I think, in that book that pays attention to structure, I'll admit. And it is Ghazal Asfin. That is taking the structure of the ghazal, which is an ode to love or loss. It's an Arabic type of structure of poetry, and then kind of playing with the structure in a contemporary way. And even the title itself, Ghazal Asfin, I shouldn't be revealing this. It's an ode to a dancer who is a very good friend of mine.
Have you also been writing other forms of writing besides poetry?
Yes. I'm finishing manuscript of or the first draft of a novel right now. So I've been really exploring poetic prose and the boundaries and the way I can push them in that sense. So besides my regular practice of writing poetry, this is one of the big projects that I've been focusing on in 2023, and very much so this year in 2024.
A few things to look forward to there. Your writings in Maltese, a new novel coming up, what, in the coming months? Should we expect it in a few months?
Mashallah, yes. I hope so.
And you also work on art installations, and you said earlier that poetry is the what informs that artistic practice. In in a few of your art installations, you project yourself as yourself in those installations. A bit reminds me a bit of Marina Abramovich and her famous installations. This used to be common in the 60s and 70s. Do you think it's a trend that is being rediscovered, and what's your thinking behind it, going for this?
I mean, I think the body is always a very powerful, important, and critical vessel to use in an artwork. I think that has not changed since the popularity of performance art. I think for me it depends on what the nature of the artwork is, or what is trying to be communicated. So, for example, in my short film, If You're Sure I Want To, it's very much about I'm using my body as myself, as Sam Alekksandra, as Sam Vassallo, to talk about a very intimate and almost taboo topic of sexual assault. And essentially, I use actually poetry to write a script about a happening in Berlin and coming to terms with that between Berlin and Malta. But then, let's say, I've had a performance very recently in March 2024 for the Malta Biennale with an Italian collective called Post-Disaster Rooftops, where after these conversations with Valletta residents about their relationship with St. Elmo, if they really even have a relationship with St. Elmo, what occupation means, does occupation ever really end, or does it morph into something else or shapeshift? Then through those meetings and through the words that I produced, in my performance, my body was just a vessel for the words. I was not myself there. In fact, during the performance, I'm not engaging with the audience in the sense that I'm not looking at them, which I would normally do, or not interacting with them. I'm always looking away, or looking at the sky, and narrating this poem on loop again and again, and improvising within these verses, because this was not my body. My body is a vessel in that sense for that particular thing. So it very much depends on the work itself.
And what are the reactions you're getting from those kind of works?
I mean, of course, with ones like the film, it's quite intense subject, and obviously in that sense film, so the reactions are quite emotional, which of course I guess like serves the purpose of the film. And I mean, the worst thing you can tell an artist or me is that you felt nothing, because even if you didn't like a piece, you're feeling something there, you're having some kind of reaction. And for me, that, I mean, I'm not here to make everybody like me or the work, I'm here to serve the work. And if I can be as authentic to the work, to then connect to someone else's experience, or let them come into this world and understand perhaps something new about me, about the world, about themselves, then my job is done. I mean, the reaction has been pretty great so far, and I'm very lucky to be surrounded by incredibly talented people in the arts and different fields who I can really trust with critical feedback. So, yeah.
Do you think the subject matter, especially when it regards sexual assault, inhibits people from even reacting, because it's so difficult? It's such a hard subject to even talk about that maybe people would hold back.
Yes. I mean, even though we live in this, I guess, post Me Too era where we're talking about sexual assault more prolifically, especially online, we're still at a point where we are viewing sexual assault through this like passive victimization lens, where it's something that has happened to us and not the fact that it is an active violence from somebody else. And we are being told to kind of deal with this experience in an individual way by going to therapy, by seeking help through medication if that's needed, or this and so forth, and not through a community sense. And getting help from the community has to start by talking about this experience and not internalizing a certain kind of victimhood. So I think that people are always shocked when they hear these stories about sexual assault, especially when, at least for me, my reaction at the premiere of my film was like, why are you doing this? Why are you telling the world something that a lot of people would bury and not tell anyone? And I'm not shaming that at all. But the idea for me, at least, was first and foremost to take this traumatic experience and make it into something that's tangible, that is external, and also be able to connect to people who have gone through it and maybe have not, so that we can kind of start a conversation and go from there.
What was the main source of motivation or courage to help you break that ceiling and speaking out?
I feel the most powerful when I lay my cards on the table, when I am presenting everything and not hiding behind shame, or not trying to minimize anything, and feel and taking up all the space that I need within a room, and not letting any preconceived ideas from society not inhibit me from doing that. So it's that, and it's also the fact that during my time at Love in Malta, one of the big projects I did was that we conducted a survey with 1,000 people about their sexual assault experiences. And so I did a 10-part article about these stories, these anonymous stories. So I felt that after giving a platform to so many people's stories and to create awareness, I felt that now suddenly I was very much a part of that community, that I felt it was my duty again to express this in any platform that I have, and in this case it was through a film.
Sam, can you read us one of your writings?
Of course. So recently, I've been writing a lot about death, a lot about grief. 2023 was a year that I lost 3 very close friends of mine, people who really formed a part of me. And right now, I'm really, they are all really coming into my work. So, first person I lost last year was Tom Petrovic. I think I butchered his last name there, but he was a very good friend of mine and the owner of a lively jazz bar in Valletta, where I worked, where I met a lot of an amazing community of people who are still very much in my life today. And this poem that I wrote and read at Poetry from the Future is inspired by him, so I'd love to read it. It's also been a year since his passing, so I'd love to read it in his honor. So it's called Plato's Kebab. That mid-March day was a big mud death, the weather unmemorable. The light could all but burst through the cling film that held my fingers, neck, thoughts, breath, holding my scolding in the window sun, a kebab sagging like a newborn still wet. It was the closest place to get it, this kebab, by the hospital, this canteen of hellish heaven, the walls that I trace to remember, unmemorable. I chewed as the after-death of aftershock, cooked into something unusual, like crispy, crude onions cruising the inner mouth to remember in the after. The day you died, I ate the most existential kebab in the world. The taste unmemorable, texture textural, enough to keep my face moving, all tongue, teeth, spit, mouth in motion, each gulp an agent of time, a forceful forward every second minute, the hospital kebab cooked behind counters with calluses, a white cage mocking our burnt plans, unmemorable, but together in likeness. A kind of Plato's kebab, a warmth of body pushing in cold shock waves, wringing out your neck, fingers, breath, you, a kind of hellish heaven, hospital kebab, a lump of soft meat, coleslaw, the hair on your chest rising and falling gently, held by supercomputers you were made part of, grinding the heart meat of your own electricity grid. The wrapper of my kebab exists somewhere in wastelands, microscopic, plastic parties in countries where deep-fried children work, your body soiled, somewhere where you came from, away from the greenwashed bar, inflamed in red, yellow, blue bulbs, and contorting bodies. This one long memory, supercut, slow motion, sped up. Your gentle giant Polish, you careless connoisseur with a thin cigarette, sucking on it through unpolished glasses, pouring drinks with exotic names. Until that last taxi ride once, when one of your fucking Red Bulls fell out into the pavement, unmemorable, and now sits in the window booth of my fridge, eating its own existential kebab. That's Plato's kebab.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank
We
you.
are at the very end of our podcast, so thank you so much for making the time for us and sharing all those experiences and your writing with us. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Karl. Thanks for the experience.
Thank you also to Clare Azzopardi, who has helped me with the research for this podcast, as she does every week. Big thank you to our listeners who join us every week on Antenni Suspettużi, the podcast by PEN Malta with contemporary authors. Join us for new episodes every Tuesday morning on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Niltaqgħu il-ġimgħa